The White Walkers represent an absolute endpoint for biological life. They do not eat, they do not drink, and they do not tire. They are completely immune to disease, fatigue, and extreme temperatures. This timeline charts thousands of years of seasonal data in Westeros. Notice this sudden, massive spike, the onset of the long night. Temperature shifts usually follow a multi-year curve. This violent transition suggests a forced catalyst rather than a meteorological cycle. The White Walkers arrived as a tactical anomaly, the catastrophic fallout of a prehistoric military experiment. To understand why that experiment was commissioned, we have to look at the demographics of Westeros roughly 12,000 years ago. A human population known as the First Men began migrating en masse from the eastern continent of Essos into Westeros. They encountered the continent's indigenous population, the Children of the Forest. The children were physically much smaller than humans and lacked advanced metallurgy. They were quickly outnumbered and severely outmatched by human bronze weapons and leather shields. The First Men systematically cut down and burned the children's sacred weirwood trees. These trees were the source of their native magic. The children were losing their territory, their dwindling population, and their ancient history. They faced total extinction, demanding a desperate, disproportionate response to survive. The defense of the children fell to the Greenseers. You can think of them as the children's highest-ranking military strategists, uniquely capable of wielding immense, nature-based magic. This map of the known world shows their first major defensive operation. The Greenseers used magic to physically shatter the land bridge connecting Westeros to Essos, breaking it into an island chain to cut off human supply lines. But as these data lines show, the First Men simply adapted and continued arriving by sea. The terraforming strategy failed because it targeted the geography. It did nothing to address the biological adaptability and relentless expansion of humanity itself. The Greenseers realized they couldn't stop the invasion by altering the Earth. They had to alter their enemy. Their tactical doctrine shifted from building environmental barriers to weaponizing biological death. When conventional geographical defenses fail to stop an invading force, a cornered civilization will eventually resort to creating weapons of mass destruction. The Greenseers captured a single human soldier from the invading First Men. He would serve as the initial biological test subject for their new weapon program. They bound him tightly to one of their remaining weirwood trees. The goal was to use the tree's magical network to permanently overwrite his human life force, stripping away his biology and replacing it with the darkest magic the planet had to offer. The physical trigger for this transformation was remarkably crude. A Greenseer forced a cursed shard of dragonglass directly into the captive's chest. Within seconds, his human warmth vanished, replaced by expanding frost and eyes that burned an unnatural bright blue. The creation of the Night King was a deliberate, engineered reprogramming. The Greenseers were turning a human into a biological weapon, designed to target the very race he once belonged to. At first, the deployment succeeded. The White Walkers possessed extreme physical strength and radiated a cold so intense it could freeze and shatter the First Men's bronze weapons on contact. However, the Greenseers engineered a fatal flaw into their weapon. To counter the human numbers, the White Walkers were designed to exponentially self-replicate by reanimating the casualties of war into a mindless, undead hive-mind army. This tactical layout reveals exactly when the command structure collapsed. The White Walkers broke free from the Greenseers' control. The undead army didn't stop at the human settlements. They began hunting the Children of the Forest alongside the First Men. An ultimate weapon stripped of all empathy and human vulnerability operates on a terrifyingly simple logic. Once deployed, a self-replicating anomaly cannot distinguish between its designated target and its creator. The planetary consequence of the weapon's release was an endless apocalyptic winter, specifically designed to systematically freeze, starve, and eradicate all biological life on the continent. Facing absolute annihilation, the surviving Children of the Forest and the First Men halted their war. They forged an unthinkable, desperate alliance, fighting side by side simply to survive the fallout of the children's own experiment. Together, they pushed the White Walkers back to the far north and constructed a massive, magically reinforced ice wall, guarded by a dedicated military order called the Night's Watch. This colossal structure served one specific purpose: a permanent magical containment zone for a failed military experiment. The White Walkers remain a permanent record of the risks inherent in desperate innovation, a weapon that outlasted its creators, its purpose, and the war it was meant to win.